Welcome back to Independent Blazers. I'm Dan, and today I'm going to talk about Egypt. But before I do, please hit the like and subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It helps the algorithm. For over 3,000 years, one land held power, wealth, and secrets that every surrounding civilization coveted. Big time. But why did everyone want Egypt? You're about to find out. In this video, we'll uncover shocking secrets about what was once the most sought-after land in the ancient world, from its strategic geography to its unimaginable wealth. Egypt was the ultimate prize. Stay tuned to discover some mind-blowing facts about this country. It's a geographical gold mine. First, an overview. Egypt has the Mediterranean Sea to its north, which is near the Fertile Crescent, and the Red Sea to its east, which is connected to an open waterway, which is the Indian Ocean. And very importantly, it also has the River Nile, the fully navigable river in Africa, which goes deep into the interior. Nile makes the land fertile in an otherwise arid area. So if you have control of three waterways, the Nile, the Mediterranean, and the Red Sea, you will have power and influence, without a doubt. With those three waterways, especially the Nile, Egypt had enough resources to feed entire empires, which is why so many different empires had their eyes on it. And they had a number of conquerors. But also there was a lot of materials that were transported to and from, such as gold, wheat, and because places like Ethiopia were fertile lands, it was an excellent trade route, the Nile River was. At its peak, Egypt's resources seemed to almost be limitless, and it was the covet of many neighboring powers. But unfortunately, geography wasn't always in its favor. That's why it was subject to so many invasions. Egypt was a source of divine power. It was a center for culture, art, and even religion. So many neighboring empires believed there was something sacred about Egypt, and if they conquered it, not only would they have legitimized power, but they would also have some kind of divinity. They would take what was holy or sacred in Egypt. For example, the Greeks merged their gods with Egyptian gods and created hybrid gods, such as Serapis. The first foreign rulers of Egypt were the Hyksos. They invaded around 1650 BCE and ruled for a little over a century. They introduced a lot of new technology to Egypt, as they themselves were originally from the Levant. Among what they introduced was the horse-drawn chariot. Now, as they were conquerors, Egyptians adopted the technology of their conquerors and used it against them and drew them out. This invasion, though, was an unfortunate turning point for Egypt, as other empires noticed how vulnerable the land was. It was easy to invade, and there were many more invaders to come. The next invaders were the Nubians, who were their neighbors to the south, who shared some cultural similarities with them, including pyramids. Nubia was with now Sudan. In fact, this is a mind-blowing fact. Sudan has the most pyramids of all countries in the world, not Egypt. Now, why they invaded were a multitude of reasons. Number one, they were very close. Number two, they wanted the gold that was there. Number three, they wanted, like others, they wanted to control the trade routes, which were the Nile, the Mediterranean, and the Red Sea. Now, the reason why it was so easy for them to take over was because Egypt was in decline due to infighting. The Nubians wanted to restore it to its former glory, but under their rule, not the Egyptians. They also thought it'd be a great strategic point for defense, such as invaders from other parts of the Nile. The Nubians ruled Egypt for a little less than a century, but then they were driven out by the Assyrians. The Assyrians, though, did not hold on to power for long, for they had problems of their own and they eventually had to leave. The next invaders were the Persians, around 525 BCE under Cambyses II. Once the Persians conquered Egypt, they called it the Jewel of the Persian Empire. They themselves were the first outsiders, whereas the previous invaders were local people who had shared history and culture. Persians were from far away. The Persians had introduced new governing administrations and functions. And with its agricultural output from Egypt, the Persians were able to make a lot of money, and they were able to expand their military and move on into the Mediterranean and have influence there, which became a direct threat to Greece. The Persians ruled for a little over a century, and then they were driven out by the Egyptians by uprisings. But about 4 decades later, they took over again, but they ruled for less than a decade, or about a decade, until Alexander the Army came and took over. When Alexander came to Egypt, history implies that he was actually welcomed. Why? Because he was a fresh change. The Egyptians were used to being ruled by the Persians, and they hated them. Alexander the Great he symbolized change. Terrifying change, but still change. And he became known as the next pharaoh. He founded the city of Alexandria. I wonder who that was named after. It has one of the oldest libraries to this day, or at least library ruins. And he influenced science, art, and philosophy. And in the city of Alexandria, he blended both Greek and Egyptian cultures together. Greeks ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, until about 30 BCE, when Cleopatra VII was defeated by the Romans. Both Greek and Pharaoh-style ruling became abolished, and Egypt became a Roman territory. When Rome ruled Egypt, Egypt provided the Roman Empire about 1/3 of its grain supply, making it crucial for survival of the empire. Although Christianity was introduced to Egypt via missionaries, while Christianity was still illegal in the Roman Empire, once it became legitimized in Rome, it spread quickly and to some neighboring countries. But this was not to last. Not only was Christianity itself only there for a limited amount of time, but so were its rulers, as there was a split between the Roman Empire and what later became known as the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines ruled from about 395 CE to about 642 CE, and then new invaders were to come. In 642 CE, or AD, however you want to call it, the new invaders of Egypt were Arab Muslims, the Rashidid Caliphate. They saw Egypt as a gateway between the Arabian Peninsula. When they conquered, not only was new architecture introduced, so was the new language of Arabic, and of course Islam. Most people were converted by coercion. Some were able to survive, such as the Coptic Christians of Egypt. But Egypt itself and most of North Africa was predominantly Muslim after the Rashidid Caliphate took over. After a series of different Arab rulers in different styles, including sultanates and caliphates and all, the Ottoman Empire eventually took over Egypt in 1517 and ruled it until 1867. But there were some disruptions. One such example was a French invasion in 1798. The purpose of that invasion was to disrupt British trade routes, and on top of that, expand French influence. And among those ways was to connect the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. And the French eventually built what's known as the Suez Canal in 1858. By the way, the general of the French army that invaded Egypt in 1798, his name was Napoleon Bonaparte. He discovered something very significant, and that was the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone translated Egyptian hieroglyphics into 2 other languages. Although the French did invade, the Ottomans still ruled it after that until 1882, when the Ottoman Empire was starting to go into decline. Britain saw an opportunity to take over Egypt, and they did. Why they wanted to take over so bad was because this canal, which was built by the French, was a direct link between Britain and its colonies in Asia. But then the British ruled on and off until about 1922. There was an uprising of Egyptian nationalists, but they still ruled partly until about 1956, when they were the last of the troops left. Then came the Suez Crisis. What was the 1956 Suez Crisis? That's for another video. If you want to know more about Egypt, please say so in the comments below. Meanwhile, grab your independent mind and blaze.